Have you ever noticed something strange? Two people walk into the exact same problem. Same situation. Same level of difficulty. One of them immediately spirals. Overthinks. Freezes. Starts imagining worst-case scenarios before even touching the problem. And the other one pauses. Not confidently. Not dramatically. Just quietly. And then they start figuring it out. Not because they know the answer, but because something in them assumes there is an answer. And if you've ever been the first person, the one who freezes, the one who feels overwhelmed before even starting, you've probably asked yourself this at some point: what do they have that I don't? Because from the outside, it looks like intelligence. Or confidence. Or maybe even some kind of natural talent. But it's none of those. What you're actually looking at is a completely different relationship with problems. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. There's a moment that happens right before someone either engages with a problem or avoids it. It's so fast you usually don't notice it. But it's there. It's the moment your brain tries to answer one simple question: can I handle this? Not theoretically. Not in general. Specifically, this exact thing, right now. And depending on how your brain answers that question, everything that follows changes. If the answer is no, or even probably not, your system starts protecting you. You hesitate. You delay. You distract yourself. You look for someone else to take over. But if the answer is yes, or even maybe, something else happens. You engage. You move closer instead of backing away. You start testing, adjusting, trying. And here's the part most people don't realize: that answer isn't based on reality. It's based on memory. Your brain is not asking, is this solvable? It's asking, have we survived something like this before? And if the answer is unclear, it defaults to caution. That's why two people can look at the exact same situation and experience completely different internal reactions. Because they're not reacting to the situation. They're reacting to their history with situations like it. Somewhere along the line, one person learned, when things break, I can figure them out. And the other learned, when things break, I should be careful, or wait, or get help. Neither of those beliefs were consciously chosen. They were built. Slowly. Quietly. Through small moments that didn't seem important at the time. Think about the first time you tried to solve something on your own. Not something huge. Something small. Maybe you fixed something. Maybe you figured out a problem nobody explained to you. Maybe you handled the situation without asking for help. If that moment ended with success, even a tiny one, your brain stored it. Not as information. As evidence. Evidence that says, I can interact with problems. Now imagine that happening again. And again. And again. Over time, something starts to shift. Problems stop feeling like threats. And start feeling like puzzles. Not easy puzzles. Not fun puzzles necessarily. But solvable ones. And that single shift changes everything. Because when something feels solvable, your brain stays online. You don't shut down. You don't spiral as quickly. You don't need immediate certainty. You can sit in the discomfort of not knowing, without collapsing. And that ability, staying mentally present inside uncertainty, is one of the most underrated psychological advantages a person can have. Most people think the difference is confidence. It's not. Confidence comes after action. What you're seeing is something much earlier in the chain. It's tolerance. Tolerance for not knowing. Tolerance for not being in control. Tolerance for being in the middle of something unresolved. Because that middle space, that's where most people break. That's where the overthinking starts. That's where your brain tries to escape by imagining outcomes, predicting failure, or convincing you not to even try. Not because you're weak. But because your system is trying to close the gap as fast as possible. Uncertainty feels unsafe to a brain that hasn't learned how to sit inside it. So it rushes to resolve it. Even if the resolution is, I can't do this. Because weirdly enough, a negative answer feels safer than an open question. But the people who seem calm in chaos? They don't rush that process. They've learned to stay inside the question longer. And that changes the outcome. But there's another layer to this that almost nobody talks about. Because not all problem solvers are the same. Some people learn to handle everything, not because they were encouraged to explore, but because they had to. For them, fixing things wasn't curiosity. It was survival. They became the reliable one. The capable one. The one who figures it out. Because at some point, not figuring it out wasn't an option. And that creates a very different internal experience. From the outside, they look composed. But internally, there's pressure. A constant need to keep things under control. To prevent things from falling apart. Because things falling apart doesn't feel neutral. It feels dangerous. You can usually recognize this type of person by one simple thing: they struggle to not fix things. Even when it's not their responsibility. Even when someone else is capable. They step in. Not because they want to. But because they don't know how not to. And that's not strength. That's adaptation. A very effective one. But still, an adaptation. Then there's the other type. The one that looks similar on the surface, but feels completely different underneath. These people don't fix things out of pressure. They do it out of interest. They're drawn to the gap between not working and working. They like understanding how things function. Why something broke. What caused it? What would happen if they changed one variable? They're not trying to restore control. They're trying to explore the system. And that difference matters more than it seems. Because one approach drains you over time. And the other one builds you. The first one is driven by anxiety. The second one is driven by curiosity. And curiosity changes your entire relationship with difficulty. Because when you're curious, failure isn't a verdict. It's data. Something you can use. Something that moves you forward instead of shutting you down. That's why being around people like this can feel so different. They don't just solve problems. They change how problems feel to everyone around them. They make it seem approachable. Temporary. Movable. Like something you can actually interact with instead of something you have to endure. And if you've never experienced that internally, it can feel almost foreign. Like they're operating under a completely different set of rules. But they're not. They just built a different pattern over time. And patterns can change. Not instantly. Not dramatically. But gradually. Through very small, almost unnoticeable shifts. Because this doesn't start with big problems. It starts with tiny ones. Moments where you would normally avoid, but instead, you engage. Not perfectly. Not confidently. Just slightly differently. You try something. You stay a little longer. You resist the urge to immediately hand it off. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But either way, your brain records it. And over time, those moments start stacking. Until one day, without realizing it, your default reaction begins to shift. You pause instead of panic. You think instead of spiral. You engage instead of withdraw. Not because you forced yourself to change. But because your system now has evidence that you can. And that's really what this comes down to. Not motivation. Not discipline. Not personality. Evidence. Your brain is always asking, do we have proof that we can handle this? And if the answer is no, it protects you. But if you start giving it small, consistent proof, that answer begins to change. And when that answer changes, your behavior follows. If you've been feeling stuck in that loop, understanding things intellectually but not seeing real change, that's usually the missing piece. Because awareness alone doesn't build evidence. Action does. Small, repeatable, slightly uncomfortable action. That's how the shift happens. Not all at once. But enough that one day, you'll be the person standing in front of a problem, pausing for a second, and then quietly starting to figure it out. And there's one more thing that most people don't realize until much later. The goal isn't to become someone who never feels overwhelmed. That's not realistic. Even the people who seem the most capable still feel that initial resistance. That moment of, I don't know if I can handle this. That doesn't disappear. What changes is what happens next. They don't treat that feeling as a stop sign. They treat it as a signal. A signal that they're at the edge of something they haven't figured out yet. And instead of stepping back, they lean in. Just slightly. That's the part you don't see from the outside. It's not confidence. It's a decision. A very small one, repeated over and over again. To stay. To try. To engage. Even when it would be easier not to. And over time, those small decisions compound into something that looks like a completely different personality. But it's not a different personality. It's a different pattern. And patterns can be rebuilt. Slowly. Intentionally. Practically. Not through motivation spikes that disappear in 2 days. But through structure. Because without structure, your brain will always fall back into what feels familiar. Even if that familiar pattern is the exact thing keeping you stuck. That gap between understanding and actually changing, that's where most people stay for years. They see it. They recognize it. They can explain it better than anyone else. But nothing shifts. Because insight alone doesn't interrupt a pattern. Only action does. And not random action. Structured, repeatable steps that your brain can actually follow when it matters. So if you've been watching this and thinking, yeah, this is exactly what I do, but also feeling like you've had this realization before and nothing really changed, then don't let this be another one of those moments. Do something small with it. Something immediate. Even if it's uncomfortable. Because that's how this starts. Not with a complete transformation. But with one moment where you respond differently than you usually would. And if you want help actually turning this into something practical instead of just another idea that sits in your head, I put something together specifically for this. It's a simple, structured reset designed around breaking exactly these patterns: overthinking, hesitation, and that constant loop of "I'll start later." Nothing overwhelming. Just clear, daily steps that help you build that evidence your brain is looking for. You'll find it in the description and the pinned comment. But whether you check it out or not, don't ignore this moment. Because the difference between people who stay stuck and people who change is rarely knowledge. It's what they do right after they realize what's been holding them back.